I struggled. I think many people think, oh, wow, they see me now, but they don't see the nights that I cried, the nights that I would call my grandmother, because when my grandmother was living, she was the only soul who understood what I was going through. And I think if I hadn't had that, I think I would have crumbled. Yeah. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, because I don't think that people talk about the struggle enough. It was a struggle.
Hey there, risers and thrivers, and welcome back to another episode of On the Up and Up. My name is Janine, and I am the creator and host of this podcast, which was created to encourage critical conversations, amplify the untold stories and achievements of the underrepresented and underestimated, and inspire visionaries to take their next steps to entrepreneurship. And today, joining with me, I'm super excited because I'm joined by Dr. Lynae Brayboy, who is a highly accomplished physician scientist specializing in the field of reproductive health. She is also the Chief Medical Officer and co-founder of Ovom Care, a company that aims to redefine reproductive care by combining modern in-person care with advanced AI technology. There's so much more I can say about you. I'm super stoked to have you here because you're just so fun to talk to every single time I've had a conversation with you.
Aww.
So thank you for joining me, first and foremost.
Janine, it's my pleasure to be here. This is so exciting and so exciting, I think, to be not only speaking to you again, but speaking to you as you've seen my evolution. Yeah. Really, you've witnessed my evolution here in Berlin, here in the startup scene, as part of Founderland. And so it's you're reminding me of things that I had long forgotten, just because we get, into the everyday groove and we think, oh, this is where we've always been. But actually, the story is important. The evolution is important. So, yeah, thank you.
And that's actually been one of my favorite parts of watching people's journeys and doing my research in the space, because I've seen a lot of y'all when you were first just coming out with an idea and then seeing it now post fundraising and everything. Yes. So it's always super exciting. It's like being the little cheerleader in the background. I was like, yeah, you've got this. You're doing it.
And we need that. Yeah. We need that, because there are times as an entrepreneur where it's like, yeah, rah, rah, woo, woo. Mm-hmm. And there's times when you're like, what am I doing? And you need your cheerleader in those times. So the community, the network is so important. 100%. So thank you for having me.
Of course, just know we're always there to cheer you on. And to kick off this conversation, I actually want to bring it back to your early career path and how you got this whole thing started, because that wasn't an easy path either. So doing my due diligence on you, I saw that you're a physician scientist, and I'm like, well, what is this physician scientist? So I'd love to talk a little bit more about your career journey. Why did you choose reproductive health and some of the outcomes of your research?
Sure. Well, my mother tells me anyhow, I always wanted to be a doctor. She said at 2 and 3, I was already pretending to be a doctor. I don't recall that, but I think in high school, as some Black mothers are, she was like, what are you going to do with your life? And I was like, I don't know, maybe an artist, maybe. And she was like, no, ma'am. Are you going to tell me by next week, are you going to be a physician or what? Ooh. And so there was some pressure. There was a little pressure. And, I thought maybe you've taken a year off. She goes, we don't do that. And you can understand.
We have the same mom.
Yeah, I think we do.
I also the same. She was like, no, that's cute.
We don't do that. So you can interpret who we is. So, I had to tell her, and I said, okay, I'm going to go to medical school. I'm going to be a doctor, right? And so, but I wasn't convinced. In my heart of hearts, I wasn't convinced. And so I did the whole biology pre-med, which is pretty standard in the U.S. It was then anyhow, not so much anymore. Went to Florida A&M. Shout out to all my rattlers who might be listening from Florida A&M, which is a historically Black college and university. And I went there with a full scholarship because originally I wanted to go to Spelman. And Spelman didn't offer me any financial aid. And my mother was like, we are going to go where there's money. And I was like, oh, man, Mom. She was like, no, you don't want to get into debt. So I said, okay, fine. I'll go to Florida A&M. But it was actually the best thing that could have happened early in my life, because I had been a minority the whole time. And I'd always been the only Black girl in chemistry or the only Black girl in algebra. And I felt isolated. Okay. And so then when I went to Florida A&M, I was amongst brilliant people from all over the diaspora, not just African American, but Caribbean, West African, East African, South American, Black people live in North Dakota I didn't even know. And so it was a really great experience. And I got to see the diversity of Blackness and that we're not a monolith, and also see the excellence, the Black excellence that really a lot of my classmates went on to have a terminal degree and are doing amazing things, living abroad, living in the U.S. And so, yeah, Florida A&M, shout out to the family.
That's amazing. That representation is so critical. It's so key, because I was also similar for me growing up, being in a predominantly white environment, and then moving and then kind of being in a really diverse space, and then seeing others that are in places that I would like to be, or at least at the same level. It's like, wow, okay, I'm not so alone in this journey.
And that's so important. People don't realize that you need to see yourself somewhere. And you can only really do that if you see someone else who represents you in some way, and who also extends a hand to you. And can also be a mentor to you. I've had many mentors over the years who, I mean, that's the reason I'm in Berlin, is because of a mentor. I came here for a sabbatical. So starting my journey at FAMU, I decided, okay, I want to be in science. I really think that science is the future. And so I did an undergraduate research fellowship, and it was at Rockefeller. And my mentor happened to be German, who lived in Berlin, but she was in New York City doing her postdoctoral fellowship, which is something you do after your PhD. So she was my mentor, and she was kind of like, here's the project, figure it out. And very German way, but I liked her a lot because she was straightforward, and in her own way, she was empathetic and warm, and she was very supportive of me doing a career as both a clinician and as a scientist. And so I reconnected with her 20 years later.
Oh, wow.
I came to Berlin for a conference. 2 days before the conference, I decided, yes, I'm going to go. Met with her for lunch, and she was like, oh, you're still in science. I read your PubMed. Oh, you're publishing. You need to come to Berlin and do a sabbatical, because I don't think where you are is really supportive of you. And I think you need some time to figure out what your next steps are. And that's how I came to Berlin.
Wow.
And that's how my entrepreneurship and femtech journey started. So.
Wow, that's really interesting. And also the fact that your mentor was able to call out that your environment was actually not really supporting you in the way that it could have been. Did you feel like that was the case for yourself as well, or was it really kind of someone else shining the light on that?
I already knew it. Okay. You know, you always know something, right? You can ignore the little voice inside you if you want. And I think I was saying, oh, I'm going to get the big next grant, something called an R01, and then I'll be able to move. And so I couldn't fathom leaving the institution where I was unless I had serious funding, because I had a mouse colony, I had people who were working for me, I had reagents, and so you need serious money to move. Also, the draw for me was that I was getting human samples, so discarded samples with essentially what we call IRB approved protocol, meaning that it went through an ethics committee and it was approved. And so having those samples to compare what we found in mice to what we could actually do in humans was super important. And so I was conflicted about leaving, but I couldn't ignore it. She started the conversation with me. She said, you need to leave. And then 2 other people said, you need to leave. And then I thought, well, how am I going to leave? Where am I going to go? And what am I going to do? And just then I got into the sabbatical program, Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin here in Berlin. And they paid for my daughter, my dog, and I to come to Berlin. And it was a fellowship called Gain Time to Think.
Oh, wow.
And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
I thought. And my next step came.
Wild. Some things are just meant to be. That's what I think you also mentioned it really previously, but there really is no such thing as a coincidence. Like, things are just meant to be, and it will work out the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I kind of wanted to touch on was that little voice or that little gut feeling that you had, because you earlier on in your journey, you said that you wanted to be an MD, PhD.
I did.
And
always.
Then you had a lot of people telling you otherwise.
Yes.
So do you want to unpack that a bit for us?
Yes. So in the U.S., to get into an MD, PhD program, it's fairly competitive because MD, PhDs are fully sponsored by the U.S. government, meaning you don't have any tuition for medical school, and then you have a free PhD program, which is usually standard for scientists in the U.S. And then you come out with this dual degree, and really you're the creme de la creme, and you're the people who are leading labs at NIH. And that's what I saw myself doing. And so when I started my application process, I wanted to do an MD, PhD, and I got rejected. from many MD PhD programs because they thought I hadn't published. I didn't know really. I'd been in summer research programs, but never had a theme in my science. And there were many other things that would complicate my application, like had I presented at a national meeting? Not really. Maybe one smaller meeting. So in any case, I thought, okay, this is not going to work. And then many people said to me, people I don't even remember their names, said things like, people never do both. You'll never be able to do both. It's super, super hard. It's terribly hard. And so I was discouraged.
Yeah, of course.
And then 2 days before medical school, I found out that I was pregnant, and it was an unintended pregnancy. And here I was, sat in my apartment thinking, how am I going to do this? I was 23. No, I was not even 23. Was I 23 yet? I think I was 22 at the time. Maybe 23. I'm trying to think back. But I was alone in a new city, Philadelphia. I didn't know a soul except for like some people from college, but I wasn't super good friends with them. And here I was about to start medical school, which is super competitive. And so MD PhD just went right out the window.
Okay.
And now my goal was to survive in medical school. My goal was to stay with my class because I thought if I get behind my class or if I take a semester off or a year off, that's a wrap for me. That's not going to happen. So
you did everything?
I did everything.
Wow.
I did everything. So the first trimester is actually pretty terrible in general, no matter what you're doing, because you have a lot of nausea. But I was doing anatomy lab with cadavers.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
So I was really sick.
Oh, I'm sure you were. All I remember was that frog in science class in like middle school. I was like, that thing smelled. I don't even want to know.
Take that and multiply it times 1,000 for cadavers. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. And then I came home and I rented an apartment, and the person below me smoked. And so I was just constantly nauseous for 13 weeks at least. Yeah.
In your first semester of med school.
Yeah.
Wild. And so then you kept pace with everything throughout that entire period
I
of time.
struggled. I think many people think, oh, wow, they see me now, but they don't see the nights that I cried, the nights that I would call my grandmother, because when my grandmother was living, she was the only soul who understood what I was going through. She had done nursing in the 1940s as a Black woman. And she was like, I know that anatomy is difficult, but you just keep looking at those things. You just keep going in there. You just don't let them tell you to go home. And I think if I hadn't had that, I think I would have crumbled. Yeah. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it because I don't think that people talk about the struggle enough. It was a struggle. I failed my first test ever in medical school. And I thought it was because I didn't study. And then I realized, it's okay. The tears they'll stop. They'll stop. Don't worry. I thought it was because I didn't study hard enough. But you know what? I had a baby. And then 2 weeks later, I took this test. I wasn't sleeping.
Yeah, you were exhausted.
I was exhausted. And no one ever said, oh, you can take this later. Oh, we realize you just had a baby. You can do this when you're like the first 6 weeks after having an infant, you don't sleep. It's like torture. And so.
And you're a single mom.
At that point, I was still with her father, but it was a terrible situation.
Okay.
He wasn't supportive. He wasn't helping. He didn't stay up with her.
Okay. So you were really on your own.
I was on my own.
Yeah.
And my parents were a 3-hour flight away. I didn't know anybody. So all that to say that I didn't know that I would graduate. But I just kept swimming, just like Dory.
Just keep swimming.
Just keep swimming and just keep taking it day by day.
Yeah.
And, the comments that people had, I would never forget. I wore a mask during the cadaver lab because obviously I knew I was pregnant. But I didn't reveal that I was pregnant because I didn't want people to start making comments and, bringing me down. And I remember my professor Carson Schneck, I think was his name. And he cornered me one day as I was leaving the anatomy lab. He goes, why are you wearing that mask? Ooh. And I said, I just don't like the smell or something like that. Tried to be like, get on with my day. And he was like, well, people only wear that if they can't take the smell or if they're pregnant. Oh, and then he just walked away. And I was like, he knows. But I just tried to ignore it and keep going. And so, I think that's the story, right? It's like things can seem insurmountable when you're facing them. But at the end of the day, if you just keep going, if you keep persevering, if you don't let the naysayers, there's always going to be the naysayers, tell you what you can and cannot do, you're going to be okay. And so I had my daughter, and then people thought, okay, she's going to drop out for sure. Even people in my family. And, that wasn't the case. In fact, I felt like I had to work harder. I had to work smarter. I had to work when she was asleep. I had to work when I felt like I couldn't just dilly-dally about studying. I had to study like I meant it, So then finding, daycare and all of that, and, you'd be surprised that even amongst the naysayers, there were people who were like, again, being my cheerleader like you. I remember daycare workers were like, "You're a medical student? Girl, you go.
Yep.
Well, that's okay. You're 10 minutes late picking her up. That's all right. I'll stay here." And those are the things that just, those little pushes that just kept me going and kept me going. And so for me, being where I am now is I've had so many opportunities that I could have said, no, this is too much. This is too much. So I finished medical school on time with the baby on the hip. She's 3 at this point. And at this point, I've matched into residency. And people told me, don't do OBGYN residency, because I knew I wanted to do women's health pretty early on. I'd done a Fulbright in Mali before starting medical school. I'd seen a lot of obstetric issues, complications, and I'd also seen infertility. And so I knew already that I wanted to do women's health. I thought I wanted to do emergency medicine. I wasn't sure. So long story short, I applied for OBGYN residency. And I remember a woman who was my mentor, I thought was my mentor, never forget her name, Pia. And Pia says to me, "Why don't you just do family medicine? That's so much easier. I don't think you'll be able to do this as a single mother. That's so much easier." And I said to her, "I don't like family medicine. I don't see myself being." She goes, "But it's going to be really hard."
And so what?
Yeah, and so what, right? The time's going to pass.
Yeah.
Residency's hard no matter where you do it and what you do it in. So I matched into OBGYN, and I matched into a program outside of Philadelphia. So I know we have a shared Philadelphia story. And that's why I went to medical school in Philadelphia, and then I went to residency in a little town called Abington, north of Philadelphia.
I know it.
And I was at Abington Memorial Hospital, and I was a resident there. And really, that was the best place for me to be, because I learned a lot. Because it's so close to Philadelphia, we had a lot of people who would come to Philadelphia for labor and delivery and obstetric care, because we had private rooms, which most Philadelphia hospitals didn't at that time. And so I learned a lot, I saw a lot, I did a lot, and it was a really great experience, and it was the place I needed to be. Although when I matched there, I was in tears because
you didn't want to.
I didn't want to go there. I thought that wasn't going to land me in fellowship. Because I thought, okay, what if I want to do a fellowship afterwards? I didn't think it was rigorous enough, but I actually did get to do the research that I needed to get into fellowship. I actually won a Philadelphia area Reproductive Endocrine Society award when I was a resident there. I had good mentors in reproductive endocrinology, which is what eventually I became. And I'm still in contact with a couple of those mentors because they were really good. And so this is, again, where you think, oh, this is not where I'm supposed to be. Oh, this is terrible. Actually try to understand perhaps that is where you're supposed to be. Maybe there is a silver lining here, and there really was. And I drove an hour to residency because we lived in Camden, as you know, is on the other side
of in Jersey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the reason we lived in Camden because that's what I could afford with a baby, and also the daycare situation was better, and the social support was better in New Jersey as opposed to Pennsylvania. So I drove an hour and worked 80 to 100 hours a week. And I thought, how am I going to do this? I spent all my paycheck on babysitters and daycare. And someone said, you want to do fellowship? It's hard to apply when you're at a community program versus a university program. I don't know if you'd get into fellowship. I had the naysayers coming again.
Always.
Like, they're always there. Just if you plan for them, then you don't get your feelings hurt. So I didn't tell anybody where I was applying for fellowship. I never told my actual, because we have to rank. It's like a lottery system for residency and then again for fellowship. And I didn't tell anybody what my number one pick was. I didn't say anything. I went to my interviews. I put things on credit cards because I didn't have the money to go to all these interviews. And I remember someone telling me that they went to 25 interviews. Every interview was like at least $2,500.
Well, why is it so expensive to go to these interviews?
Because you have to fly there.
Oh, okay.
You have to have a hotel.
Okay, so it's
exactly
logistics, okay.
The logistics. And I had to always have a babysitter too. And then you have to beg your co-residents to cover your calls, and that's never nice because then you make them work more, and they're already working hard.
Yeah.
So it was tough. And I remember thinking, I only have X amount of money, but I had a program director, Joel Poland, bless him, who said, listen, if you run out of money, I'll write you a check.
Oh, that's amazing.
And that, when you have these little cheerleaders, again, it helps you to keep going. I never had to ask him for money, but I always knew I could if I needed to. So yeah, it was rough. And then I matched into to fellowship, and I thought, we're leaving the inner city now. Woo, we're leaving. And we're moving to, like a really up and coming place. And turns out Rhode Island isn't.
I was going to ask where'd you go? All right.
We were very isolated there in Rhode Island, my daughter and I.
Yeah.
But I did, I was at a place that wasn't particularly fond and friendly of me, but I survived. I got my, after fellowship, I got my what we call a postdoctoral fellowship, the Reproductive Scientist Development Program from the NIH, NICHD specifically. And so I was able to fund the beginning of my research, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to design experiments. I was kind of floundering. And then I just started to teach myself, because I realized, again, my mentor from Germany from when I was 19, 20 in New York said, figure it out. No one's gonna hold your hand and figure it out. So I started figuring it out. I started, making papers, but I always had my mentor as my senior author, even though I was funding the research for the most part. I was in his lab, but I was funding the research. I was coming up with the ideas, and he would give me feedback. But at some point, the way that the progression should be in science is that you start becoming the senior person on the paper, because it makes everyone think that you're the brains behind the paper. And so right around the time I reconnected with my mentor, Constanza here, she said, oh, this guy's not supporting you. Someone else said, if he continues to be on all your papers, no one's ever going to think you are the scientist, that you're just the hands. And then I was like, I felt betrayed. I felt like, oh my God, why didn't anyone say anything?
Yeah. Hey, it's me popping in quickly to ask, what do you think of the episode so far? Feel free to share your thoughts by leaving a comment or review. Also, it would mean the world to me if you would follow, like, and subscribe to On the Up and Up. This simple act helps us to grow. Thank you in advance, and back to the episode. I was going to say, so you didn't even know that
I didn't even know. Okay. Because, who tells you the rules of science?
Yeah, fair.
You walk through the halls of people doing science, and who do you think of as scientist when you think in your mind?
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know a single Black female scientist who had her own lab. Yeah. And I still try to think, do I know of a single Black female scientist who has her own lab? In reproductive endocrinology, I could maybe say one or two who maybe had at some point. Mm-hmm. But in general, I couldn't name maybe one at Harvard. Okay. Yeah. So I didn't know the rules. Yeah. There are rules to every game. And so fortunately, I went on to have 10 years of uninterrupted funding. And I was able to write papers, and I brought a grant here to Germany, even to Charité. And that research is now being translated with Ovom. Back to my origins, back to human oocyte biology, not just mouse oocyte biology. So all that to say that, that your mentor giving you advice and telling you you're not being supported, had she not said that, I don't know where I'd be. And the other two people who came up to me independently and said, you need to leave.
That's wow.
Yeah.
First of all, your journey and every day, just trying to make every day and trying to push forward and just keeping going. Obviously, on a personal level, it's not something I relate to, but it's something that I experienced through my mother when she moved to the U.S. and didn't even understand what the Social Security number was and how to work in the country. And me as a 3-year-old toddler with her first job at 35. Wow. And then she was there and my mom was always saying, all my money went to babysitters.
Yeah.
I was just like, I didn't know how I was going to do it, but it just went to babysitters. But when I look back at our journey, there were a lot of naysayers, and I recall them very well, but not to focus on them, but the champions that were there, the cheerleaders. Yeah. Like, I remember for my mom, that was very much like the church community that we had growing up, who was just always there in the background, like, hey, we can take her for a little while. Like, she can hang out with us after school. Because my mom, after school care is expensive.
Yes, after school care is like,
yeah,
they get you, and don't come late.
No,
you get the evil eye.
That part, and my mom was always late.
Yeah,
and she needed them in the morning too, right?
Yeah.
So at one point it became like, okay, you go hang out with the pastor's kids' children, you know, go to your choir, go to your signing things, go do all of those things.
Yeah.
But then it was just the people who were just like, yeah, you can do it, you know, just keep going. And so really, I'm so happy that you had those cheerleaders in your journey that got you to where you are today. And yeah, I don't know. I'm really proud of you as I listen to your story.
I'm proud of your mom and you because it's a unit. I mean, my daughter was, you know, you as the child, I'm sure you remember there's some times where you were like, I have to be really good and quiet.
Oh, yeah.
You like, you at 4, I mean, Lynae was coming, 3 even. She was coming to the hospital with me because daycare didn't start till 6, but I had to be done rounding by 6. So I had to be at the hospital for 4:30 and finish all my notes, finish rounds, and be ready for sign out at 6:30. But then I had to get her across to the daycare and then come back and be on time. Because the thing is that people don't realize it's like the military in medicine, especially when you're in training. And so if you're missing, if you're not where you're supposed to be, it's not going to last long. At any point, they can put you out and then you have no recourse.
Oh, wow.
You have no recourse in many ways. And so then you can't get a license if you don't finish residency. Okay. So you can't get a license to practice.
So you really have to be on it.
Yes, you always have to be on it. And if you miss a beat or if they think all you need to do is be marked, right? And then there's political whisperings and things like that. So you always have to have evidence that you are working hard and doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's intense. It's interesting because this is like the first time we've actually spoken about it, right? But the Lynae that I know that I've been seeing over the last couple of years building Ovom has always been this very optimistic, very fun, very happy person. So obviously I would never have known any of those things, and you don't show any of those things, and you're clearly in like a very happy state in your life, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to take that now to you being here in Germany and in Berlin.
Yes.
And one of the things that I found was so fascinating in one of our first conversations was you were like, yeah, back in April 2022, you didn't even know what an incubator was.
I had no idea.
You didn't know nothing about entrepreneurship.
I mean,
and then
now I know.
You're here. You just raised, a 4.8 million seed round. Congratulations.
With my co-founders.
With your co-founders.
Yes.
You're building Ovom. So what happened?
Yeah. So, okay, let me be quite transparent. So my parents have always been entrepreneurs. But not in the sense of VC funded and that type of thing. They always had rental properties. They always had some other alternative income because my father, who I wouldn't say I'm like him personality wise, but I could understand my father in many ways because my father was always a visionary. And it's hard to be a visionary when you work, you know, with Bob Bobalina in a 9-to-5 job. And he stood out. And so he would always politically get outmaneuvered and then he'd be out of a job. And then so it was a recurring theme. And then my dad was like, you know what, I can make as much money doing things for myself. And so, my dad being that visionary, and our last name means Brayboy, means one who knows no fear. My dad really being fearless about, okay, I can do this without having that security of the job. And so that entrepreneurship gene was always there, perhaps I could say. And my mother has a master's in finance, and so they're not medical people at all. It definitely skipped a generation. It came from my grandparents that I got the medical gene, but the business gene came from them. And so I had that as a background. And so, I actually developed a research app to teach girls about sex ed when I was in the U.S. And I remember talking to my financial advisor and saying, maybe I should try to turn this into a business because it's really hard to get grant funding. It's really hard to get funding when anytime you say technology, sex ed, and girls in the same sentence.
Oh,
yeah, you're not going to get any funding, even though at that point the teenage birth rate was an issue. It's improved since, but it was an issue. And so, I said to my financial advisor, do you think I should maybe turn this into a business? And she was like, oh, no, you could go bankrupt. You don't know anything about business. And it was like, complete naysaying.
Back to those naysayers again, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, maybe she's right. Maybe she's right. And so I didn't do anything. But that app and doing that pilot project and publishing on that is what actually, when I came here for the sabbatical, allowed me to get a job in femtech.
Okay.
So then I was working for a period tracker, Clue, which is based here in Berlin. And so I was already understanding business. I was understanding VC funding. I was already understanding a little bit, but as an employee. not as a founder, which is very different. So on occasion, I would have to go make presentations before the board, but I didn't understand rounds. I didn't understand any of that. And how do you actually start something? And in Germany, it's not like the U.S. and other places where you can just say, I'm going to start a business today. No. It's a more of a bureaucratic paperwork, uphill thing that you have to do. So getting my feet wet was really here. And so I remember I got a random email from micropreneurs that there was a reception one night, and I took a cab because I was already going to be late, and I took a cab there, and I just plopped myself there, and it was Google for Black Founders Fund. And on the stage is Deborah Choi.
Hey, shout out to Deborah.
Yay! And Founderland.
Yeah.
And I had seen her at like a Black business dinner before, but it was a very, I didn't get a chance to talk to her afterwards. There was really no Q&A, so it was difficult to maybe talk to her after that. So this is my second time seeing her, and she goes on to talk about, her businesses, and she's a 6-time founder, and she said, if you are here tonight, you're a founder. Start calling yourself a founder. And I get chills when I even think about it, because I was sitting in the audience going, but what the hell am I going to find? Yeah. I was thinking, like, is this silly? Because, I'm a scientist, and we don't say things unless they're actually real. Yeah.
So you're like, what is this?
Is this craziness? And so I got up and asked her a question, and I think, and because she posted about this actually maybe a couple months ago, she said that the woman in the audience was asking permission. And basically she needed to know, is it okay if I start doing this? And that's exactly what I was saying. I was like, well, I think my question was something like, well, can you really be a founder if you don't know? And should I find a business here or back in the U.S.? Because everyone would say in the U.S. there's more resources than the U.S. And yeah, to some degree that is true, but Berlin has the community. I don't think I could have just plopped into a reception and met a Deborah Choi in Rhode Island or Philadelphia or St. Petersburg, Florida, or Mali and Bamako. So Berlin had the network, and Migrapreneur is really interesting because it was highlighting that immigrants and people who migrate here have the same opportunities.
Shout out to Anna Alvarez.
Yes,
for Migrapreneur.
Yes. Yeah. And so I was like, okay. And you sometimes don't know, a little drop, a little seed will start to like change everything. And I started thinking of business ideas and running it by people. And I thought, okay. And I applied for Google for Black Founders Fund and didn't get it. And I was like, well, I wasn't really going to get it anyhow, but that's okay. I got a good practice in. And so then I thought, okay, cool. And then some things changed at Clue. Okay. And part of my team was laid off. And I started looking for a job for one of my teammates because I felt responsible.
Oh, that's kind of you.
Since I had recruited her. No, I had recruited her. So I felt like, I sold her.
Transition to
exactly.
The next thing.
So, and so I started to look on LinkedIn more because I had no LinkedIn profile, as I found out later in Founderland. Yeah, I mean, I had a profile, but I didn't do anything with it. So.
You were never posting or anything?
And never posting. Yeah. Never. Not until Founderland. And so as I was looking for a job for her in marketing, healthcare marketing specifically, I found my co-founder on LinkedIn. She was posting for a co-founder and CMO of a reproductive fertility tech business. And I was like, what is this?
And you're like, this is kind of my alley.
This is
interesting. Yeah.
So I had a conversation with her. We had a good conversation. She invited me to come in to speak with her in person. It went really well. And then I was going to come in for like a final. And then she, emailed me, and she's a very transparent person, which is why we work well together. And she said, listen, we've actually found someone who's very far along in the pipeline. I don't want to waste your time, and just want to let you know that we're probably going to go with the other person. So no one knows this, no one sees this, right? You think that everything was like, everything was wonderful, and then we started the company, and so you can have two reactions to an email like that. You can have the reaction, well, bump her then, like, how could she not like me?
You don't want me, I don't want you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or you could have the open-mindedness that says, okay, well, let's just see where it goes. She said, well, maybe you could be part of the medical advisory board. And I said, yeah, that'd be interesting. So that's what I came in to talk about, being part of the medical advisory board. And I walk in at 9 thinking I'm going to get out by 11, go to my lab, do some things that I needed to do at Charité. I walk in at 9, I'm there at 5 p.m.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, is this what you're going to do for all the medical advisory board people? Like, this is intense. And then she goes, I just wanted you to talk to Rasmus. At this point, I was like, I don't know who Rasmus is.
I was going to say, who's that?
He's one of our investors through Morantix, which is who provided our pre-seed round. And so at that point, I didn't know that, though. And, we just had a conversation. He was like, so how do we get you to stay? And then I realized, psych. They do want me to stay, but I just thought I was talking about, being medical. So I was like, if it were me, I would do this. And the whole day I was just, just telling them my vision, what I would do based on my experience. And so it was very natural. I wasn't nervous. Like, for me, the opportunity had passed. So I'm just like
you're
saying,
just being yourself.
I'm just being myself.
It's not an interview. You're just, you're giving advice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then that was the beginning. And then we have our third co-founder, who is an embryologist, and then Felicia, who is a patient and also a business person. She has a master's in business and innovation. So it was like a perfect alignment. The three of us came together, all being frustrated with the field, frustrated with IVF in general.
And actually, IVF is a topic that is prevalent in how I came to be on this earth. And so what I think I wanted to kind of dive into, though, because for Ovom's mission, you really are focusing on marginalized communities and people who maybe don't have these opportunities.
Access,
have access to these treatments. And I wanted to explore that a little bit, is why is that so important? Why is that so needed? So what is the issue, the problem in the industry that Ovum is coming in to solve, and that frustration that you all felt?
Yeah, the frustration is that the innovation is lacking in IVF. So we've known about the concept of IVF since the 1930s. That's 1930. Okay. And it wasn't until the late 70s that, of course, it was translated to humans. Okay. And the first IVF baby, Louise Brown, was born. Okay. And what we don't know, and I had the opportunity to meet Louise and her father, actually,
cool.
which is amazing. It's like if you think you one day might shake your science project's hand, it's like that. It's like that kind of feeling.
That's super cool.
And she's super lovely, and her father's lovely. And the backstory that many people don't know is that her mother and her father, her mother is deceased now, they didn't have a lot of money. The dad drove a truck, mom stayed at home, and he actually had to win like a lottery. He gambled to have enough money to enroll the mom into the study. Oh, wow. Okay. And then she was picked because she had an ideal case. She had what we call tubal factor, or her tubes were an issue. Okay. And so the tubes, or the fallopian tubes, are where you conceive. So the egg and the sperm come together in the fallopian tubes. So she was an ideal candidate. And so that is why she became the first person.
Oh, wow. But how come she had to pay for it? Because they needed her, no?
Well, now we pay people to be in studies. Yeah. We have to compensate people for their time and effort. At that point, I'm not really sure why, but they had to have some type of money to even be enrolled in the study. At this point, we wouldn't do that because that obviously, again, doesn't allow everyone to access science. And as you know, in science in general, we don't have the diversity when it comes to clinical trials, not just black, white, or any other ethnicity. I'm talking about female. I mean, it wasn't even mandated by the NIH until the 1990s, 1993, that women had to be in clinical trials.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's really hard to get people who are diverse BMIs, diverse backgrounds, diverse everything to be in a study. So at that point, though, those were not things that I think in the late 1970s people were focusing on.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And talking about the topic of accessibility when it comes to these kind of treatments, I mean, I always find the topic of IVF really fascinating because of my origin stories being that. So I'm always listening to other people's stories around IVF. And so, like, I think Adrienne Bailon in the US, he's a celebrity, and she brought her son into this world going through IVF treatments, but then she talked about the costs.
Yes.
And the fact that she also had her own issues going on. So it actually took multiple IVF treatments and different things therapies and things that she tried, and they spent thousands.
And that's typical.
And so
That's
like
typical in the U.S. Yeah.
What is the typical cost for like one cycle of IVF treatment?
It ranges. What's published is about $12,000 to $15,000, but with all the medications and everything, it's easily closer to $20,000 per cycle, which doesn't mean that you actually have a live birth at the end of that cycle. So what that means is that most people can't afford it. 95% of the people who need IVF cannot afford it. So imagine there's a treatment for your illness and you can't access it. And people don't think of infertility as a disease.
I was going to ask, what do you mean by illness? It is. Okay.
It is. It's a condition like anything else that needs evaluation, diagnostics, and treatment. And people think, oh, you can just adopt. Oh, you can just not have a kid. Oh, you can just get a dog. And I'm like, how flippant is that? Because in some cultures, you absolutely need to. Like in Mali, where I lived, and saw that infertility could lead to you being divorced and being an outcast in your community. And people would say, but not in the West. Women are advanced. Women don't need that. That's not true. That's not true. And if you listen to people who struggle with infertility, they will tell you how terrible they feel at Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever.
On a personal note, my mom actually talks about that period of time where she was struggling with infertility, which was around 5-6 years period. And she was like, I was getting crazy. Yeah. She's like, Janine, I was getting crazy. I don't know how to explain it to you, but she was just like, I need to have a child. And yes, the option of adoption was there and all of those things, but she's like, I want my biological child. And so she always explains, like, she was to this point where she was getting depressed.
Yes.
She was getting frustrated when she was seeing her siblings having children and this easily having a ton of children. And she was having miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage to the point where she was just like, you know what, like, I don't want to hear anything about the topic of pregnancy. And then coming from Ghanaian culture, that everyone is then, what's wrong with you? Why haven't you and your husband have been together for almost a decade? Why don't you have a child yet? Why don't you try this potion? Someone told her, because you wear such tight pants, that's why you can't have a child. Another person said, your house is too clean. Children don't like that. That's why you're not getting pregnant. Like the nonsense things that people were saying to her during that time.
There's a lot of judgment.
There was a lot
of stigma.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that. And so people do feel, this is not something you can just bring up at a lunch conversation. You break your arm, everyone's like, oh, are you okay? You may hold the door for you. When you have infertility, it's unseen, right? And so there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering. And now there are more groups and support structures and people who are familiar with the process, but not 20 years ago, not even 10 years ago. And now what we find is that people really don't know what to do. And so there's no easy pathway to getting the early referral. So you might bring it up with your OBGYN. Depending on the OBGYN's comfort with fertility, they may do an evaluation. They may tell you keep trying. But we know that people who are over the age of 35, it's 6 months of trying to conceive without being able to have a baby. And if you're under the age of 35, it's 12 months. But sometimes even those definitions don't apply to everyone. What if you're same sex, right? What if you know that you don't have the ability to conceive a child naturally? Those individuals probably need earlier referral. And so the access issue comes not only from not being able to pay for it, but also not having the resources and the abilities to even find out what is wrong, the diagnostics. Because unfortunately, when it comes to women's health, reproductive endocrinology isn't taught widely and enough. So in medical school, I think we had 2 weeks of women's health and reproductive endocrinology before the end of the term, right before Christmas, when nobody's brain is functioning. And then I think, unless you go into OBGYN, you're not focusing on women's health. And a lot of people will see their family medicine or their GP, their internist. And even within OBGYN, the rotation with a reproductive endocrinologist tends to be, not always, but tends to be very short. So many people don't really get how to work up someone. And there are publications from organizations of how to work people up, but you often see people just don't get that evaluation, right? Or they work up the person who has ovaries or the woman, but they don't work up the person who has sperm testes. And that's difficult, right? Because there's two people trying to make a baby. And so one of the things that we want to do at Ovom is educate people. Okay, so that our website now is, we give you information. You can come in and have a free consultation with a physician who's licensed. It's not medical advice, but we give you basically the sex ed that you never got, okay, and information about how you would be evaluated. Eventually, we won't be able to do that at a large scale, but we'll have videos and information so that people can get the right information, because Google, I love Google, you can't get all the information you need, and some information is just not right. No one's filtering that information. And so at Ovom, we want to make that information readily available. Like, we don't have to hide the fact about how does fertilization occur. Like, everybody should know that. Yeah. Okay. If you're listening, it's in the fallopian tubes. Okay. That's where fertilization occurs.
So actually, I just learned that through having this conversation because I thought it was in the uterus.
No, implantation happens in the uterus. Yeah. So it's not very efficient human reproduction. So the sperm have to swim a very long way. So after an active intercourse, sperm is deposited in the vagina, and then they have to swim in the vagina, which is a hostile place, okay, for sperm. It is. And only the strong survive. So men make 1,000 sperm per heartbeat and make millions of sperm in an ejaculate, which means whatever the cum essentially is the lay term. And so then the sperm have to swim through the cervix. Okay, the cervix has lots of little glands and crevices. The sperm can get lost if they're not careful, and also there's a cervical mucus, and the mucus, if it's ideal and favorable, the sperm can swim easily through, and if it's not, the sperm kind of get stuck, and then it has to go through the uterus.
Oh my God, what a journey! Okay,
yeah, we're not done yet. We're not done yet. Keep going, and they have to go through the uterus, and then they have to go to the correct tube, because you may ovulate on the left that month.
So it's only coming out of one side.
Yeah, well, usually you have one egg release from one ovary per menstrual cycle. You collect a group of eggs together, okay, and only one dominant follicle is the one that gets released, okay, and you don't know if that's going to be your left or right. We usually have a favorite side, just like we're right or left-handed, and so then the sperm have to go to the tube where that egg is, and the egg does not wait for sperm. Okay, the egg will only live for 24 to 48 hours. The sperm can live in the GYN tract for up to 5 days.
It only lives for 24 to 48 hours?
Yes. Think of the egg as a diamond. It's a precious jewel, and it only makes its debut only if you're there and ready to fertilize it. If you're not there, goodbye. Goodbye, world.
But that's wild. Okay, because everyone... Sorry. Because, like, when I think back to, when you're growing up in school and everyone's like, you'll get pregnant. Careful, you'll get pregnant. And then I'm like, you mean to tell me that thing's only hanging out for 24 to 48 hours? So I've got the rest of the month.
But the problem is,
you just don't know when.
You don't know when. There are some signs of ovulation.
Yeah.
Okay. Signs that are relatively reliable. But when you're 15 and 16, you don't know what those signs are. And also when you're 15 and 16, it's easy to get pregnant. So when you're young and dumb, that's when it's easy to get pregnant. Yeah. And then when you are like established and have some savings, then it's hard to get pregnant.
Is it true that like after 25 is really
35?
It's after 35.
Yeah.
Okay.
But every year older. So we think that egg quality probably peaks in your mid-20s into your early 30s. But it could be different for everyone, because everyone's ovary may age at different rates. So just because you're 35 doesn't mean your ovaries are acting like they're 35. They could be acting like they're 40. So a lot of people who do at least have access to diagnostics, they'll get an AMH and they'll go, oh, my AMH is good. I'm good. Not necessarily. AMH is called, or it stands for anti-Müllerian hormone. It's a marker of ovarian reserve. It's something that we check as part of the fertility evaluation, but it's dynamic. It's constantly changing. It's actually secreted by small developing follicles within the ovary, and so it's going down our complete reproductive lifespan. So we make all the eggs that we'll ever make when we are a fetus, before we're born. Okay, and then we start losing them automatically. Not through ovulation. We just lose them through a process called atresia, or apoptosis, or programmed cell death. And then by the time we're born, we only have about 1 million eggs. By the time we get to puberty, a couple 100,000. Okay. And then by the time we get to menopause, when our periods stop, we're at 1,000. So between puberty and menopause, that's our reproductive lifespan. But we don't know how long or short that will be. We do not have a test yet for menopause. So we have no idea when you're going to go into menopause unless you know your mother's age of menopause. And most mothers, my mother doesn't say period, so I can't even ask her, like, when did your period stop?
Yeah.
She doesn't know.
Yeah.
Again, the medical gene skipped my parents. So it's difficult. And you'd say, how in this day and age do we have, the innovation and technologies we have, and we can't even tell when women are going to go into menopause? And our collaborators at Ovom and my colleagues in science are actually working on this, and we're trying to collaborate so that we can actually tell people you're -7 to menopause, or you're -10 to menopause, because you can plan more your reproductive lifespan.
So there's a way for people to find out more or less like what range they would potentially
in
go
the
into
future.
menopause. In the future.
In the future,
okay.
not
But it's
today.
just not there yet.
It's not there yet, because when we think about funding for women's health, it's abysmal. So even in VC funding for women-led companies in women tech or femtech, it's abysmal. So at Ovom, we're incredibly grateful for our investors who really have said, yes, this is the future for women's health. And doing research is actually one of Ovum's missions.
I love that.
Yeah, because we need to find out more. We can't be static, right? There's so much research that is poured into pediatrics or male sexual dysfunction, but then somehow women's health is just skipped. I mean, we even share an institute in the U.S. with children.
So kind of going back to what you were saying about the aging of the body and everything. So these are one of the things that kind of crosses my mind a lot now that I'm turned 27 not too long ago.
Yeah, it's a good age. I love 27 was amazing for me.
I'm enjoying it.
That's when I finished med school.
That's nice. You're like freedom at that point.
That's what I thought. I didn't know.
But turning 27 is an interesting age, especially for someone like myself, where you get a little bit of the comments of like, what are you doing now? You did your master's, so I get these comments a lot. You've done your master's, you've done your bachelor's. You have everything. The only thing missing for you is the partner and the family thing. And
goodness.
This is coming a lot, right?
Yeah.
And I'm more like, well, it'll happen when it happens, so don't stress me out.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying myself, so
right?
leave me.
Mm-hmm.
But then the topic of reproductive health and all of that comes into my mind, especially for someone like me I grew up as an only child, so I would love to have a big family at some point. And then I'm a dork, so I watch a lot of videos and podcasts and things about this topic. And so I remember being so shocked when someone said, I think perimenopause, or you can start feeling the perimenopausal symptoms already at like 35. And like wherever apparently what I understood was you can go into menopause as early as like in your mid 40s, late 40s.
Yeah, anytime after the age of 40 is not pathological.
Yeah, and then already 10 years before that, you could already start experiencing...
Potentially, depending on someone's ovarian physiology.
Exactly, but we don't have anything to really test these kind of things and stuff. And so...
Just hormonal profiles, which may not actually reflect someone's symptomatology.
Yeah, so this conversation comes up a lot with me and a lot of my female friends where we're like, well... We're in our later 20s now, which is fine, though. We're cool. We're still making it work, right? But the prospects, especially in Berlin, they're looking slim.
What? Dating in Berlin is hard? I've never heard that.
Yeah. Looking a little slim out here in the city. And so I remember for myself, I was like, well, egg freezing sounds like a great option. So that at least I have the option in the future.
Yeah.
And then my mom was like, what? But... Could we talk a little bit about egg freezing? Because outside of knowing egg freezing and the fact that like it's an option, I don't actually know much of anything about it. The cost, how, all of that stuff, the stigma, clearly. Hey there, it's me again. Thanks for listening this far. Tell me, what do you think about our conversation? I'd love to know your take and perspective, so please feel free to leave a review, a comment, and let us know what you think. Also, On the Up and Up is in its infancy, and we have major plans to turn it into something more than just a podcast. But to do that, we need your support. So please like, comment, follow, and or subscribe to our various channels to stay notified on how things are developing. All channels are linked in our show notes. And with that being said, back to the episode.
Well, yeah, let's talk about egg freezing. The person who invented or who really discovered that IVF was even possible in mammals actually also discovered the birth control pill.
Oh.
Yes. Gregory Pincus, an immigrant to the U.S. And he lost his job at Harvard, actually, for the whole IVF bit.
Really?
And he was doing work in his garage. But the reason I say that is because when we think about the birth control pill and we think about what does it do for us, it allows us to have a baby when we want, right?
Yeah.
That's the benefit of the birth control pill. Now, there are other non-contraceptive benefits to the birth control pill, but that's the main USP. That is it, right? We don't want to have a baby at 17. We want to have a baby later. Yeah. Okay. So that's, and when the birth control pill came out, because many of your listeners may not realize this, it didn't get a wonderful reception from society. In fact, it got a chilly one. In fact, the reason we have placebo pills in a birth control pill pack, which are the sugar pills where there's no hormone, is because of a particular church in a particular area in New England. So I'm trying not to be sued, so I'm being very nebulous about it. And that is why we have it, because they had to market the birth control pill to this particular church in a particular diocese in New England to say that it wasn't about birth control. It was more about regulating your period.
Oh, interesting.
So you had to have this withdrawal bleed so that you could be like, it's regulating your period, not controlling the number of babies.
So the withdrawal bleed is not even necessary?
Not really. You could take the pill continuously, depending, obviously speak to your doctor. This is not medical advice on this podcast, but there's no real need to have withdrawal bleed. Okay. So it was part of the marketing.
I'm learning so much right now.
And that same entity also poo-poos IVF. And society's reception, not just this particular religious entity, but society's perception about the pill was very negative. And some countries even banned it. You imagine? Okay. So again, it was about liberating women, and people could have a baby when they wanted to. They could pursue their careers. They could do whatever. Now, let's think about egg freezing. Egg freezing, which is part of, people don't think of egg freezing in IVF. Well, in vitro fertilization, which is what IVF stands for, then we fertilize the egg, we make an embryo, and then the person potentially wants to get pregnant or have embryos for later. Egg freezing is the same process up to the fertilization. Okay. So many people think, egg freezing, that's that's not a good idea. It's the same thing. It allows you to have a baby when you want. It's the same freedom that the birth control pill gives you. And why? Because when you are younger, as we talked about reproductive aging and the ovary aging, is that the egg, when you are 25, that you are not producing because you've made them all, but the ones that you are actually maturing are probably going to be higher quality than when you're at 45. Okay? So we can't freeze people's eggs when they are later in their reproductive lifespan, because we're just going to be, doing it for naught, because those eggs are probably not high quality and we're not sure they'll be fertilized and make embryos, and people have a false sense of security. So there's no ideal time. There's many organizations that say there's no ideal time because there's no evidence about the right time to freeze eggs.
Is that a lack of research problem again?
Again, and egg freezing, to be fair, wasn't even standard of care until 2013. So it was something we were doing only for cancer patients, people who were going to go and have chemo that was going to cause their ovaries to have damage. Okay. So then we started doing it electively. Okay. And it's called elective oocyte cryopreservation, or social egg freezing, some people call it. Most professionals don't call it social egg freezing. But the point is that society has had a change due to the birth control pill, that women are now being able to do their masters, like the amazing woman who's sitting in front of me. You're living independently. You're doing your thing. You have your podcast. This is not the time for you, right? And so, but you want to have children in the future. So what you can do is do a round or 2 or 3, depending on your diagnostics, of egg freezing. And what's different about Ovom compared to the average IVF clinic is that we're giving you insights about your egg quality based on AI tools. So we use something called computer vision that can actually score your eggs compared to the eggs of people who go on to get pregnant or not. So you have an idea. It's not just a numbers game. It's not just quantity, but it's also quality. And so you have an idea, and so then you get insights, not to say that it's diagnostic, but you get insights about the egg quality that you have. And that's today. In the future, we'll design other tools that'll have even more in-depth ability to look at egg quality. And so it gives people a sense of, not insurance, because egg freezing is not insurance. Nothing in life is guaranteed, especially not in biology. But it gives you an idea, okay, I could try to have a baby naturally. Maybe when I find a partner and let's see if it happens naturally, great. And then maybe you want to have a second. You said you want to have a big family. Maybe you want to have a second or third. And then you have secondary infertility, which means you were able to get pregnant once, but now you can't. Okay. You can still go back and use those eggs. Okay. Let's say you have 3 babies and you go, oh, no, I don't want a fourth. I don't want a fourth. I don't need those eggs. Yeah. You can discard them. They were always there as a potential use for you. Okay. Or you could give them to your cousin who has infertility and wants still to have someone who's biologically related to them, but can't afford an egg donor or can't use an egg donor. In Germany, it's forbidden. Okay. So, those are the opportunities you have when you freeze eggs, or you can donate them to science so that people like me who are oocyte biologists can actually say what makes a good egg versus a bad egg. We don't even really know that when it comes to a chicken egg. We definitely don't know when it comes to a human egg. Okay. And so we have a lot of ideas of what makes a high quality egg, but how do we tell people that when we're actually retrieving the eggs and have them in front of us before we freeze them? Okay. We do that right now through computer vision and AI tools. But again, we need to evolve. We need to progress, and innovation in women's health is lacking. So that's really our mission.
That's really interesting. And that's super cool because I was always wondering what the AI component of it is, because I always hear companies talking about, oh yeah, AI this and AI that. Yeah. And then I'm always like, what is the AI? But that's actually really fascinating. So you're really able to tell, hey, your quality, pretty good. You should be okay. And I think for me and a lot of the women my age who are, because the career clock and the biological clock, they run at two different speeds.
I hate the biological clock. The patriarchy made that word up.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, sorry, but they've been doing their own thing.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really cool that it gives us at least the peace of mind that, okay, there's at least a potential option or a backup plan, hopefully, if that one works out. And so maybe the question I would have, because I know this would be the question that has come up with my friends and I, is always, what should we know when we're going to have these conversations? Like what would, because to me, I'm like, okay, maybe I would go and have these conversations, but I don't actually understand any of the terms.
Right.
I don't understand like what the rules are. So what are maybe the top 3 things that someone who's considering this should keep in mind?
Yeah. Number 1, definitely make sure that you understand what you're getting yourself into. It's still a medical procedure. Okay. There are some risks associated with it, but there are some major benefits. And the benefit is you being able to pursue your career. You being able to say, I'm not going to settle down with this guy because actually I don't really like him. And I definitely won't like him in 10 years. Be very careful. It's almost like you want to treat your eggs as if they're diamonds. They are. They're precious. So if he's not worth your diamonds, don't keep dating him, because you feel the pressure. And I've seen that in my own friend circle where people kept dating somebody because they felt reproductive pressure to have a baby. So that's number 1. Number 2, I would say really think about your reproductive life future plan. Meaning, how many children do you want? So you say you want a big family. So how many eggs do you need to freeze compared to the person who only wants just one baby? Maybe. Right? Okay. So we, on average, tell people that they need to freeze 15 to 20 eggs. That's the average recommendation. But that's to have at least one baby if you are on the younger side of the spectrum. Okay. But depending on your diagnostics, depending on how big your family you want to have, you might need to do several rounds. And so you really want to have a conversation with yourself. What's your ideal family, right? Do you want to have 2 kids and that's it? Do you want to have 3 kids? I mean, my mom had 3 kids, but we're all 7 years apart. So, I don't think she planned that. So it's really important that you really sit down and plan. I didn't plan my daughter, right? And how much better is it for you to be fulfilled as a mother if you really say, this is what I really want. This is when I want to have them, so that you have time and space. So that's number 2. And then number 3, think about how the process will be for you. Meaning, you want to go to a clinic that you feel comfortable. You want to go to a place where you feel that you can financially afford it. If you feel like you're being pressured into something, you feel that you're going to break the bank, that's not the place for you, right? And unfortunately, a lot of the financing options and the insurance doesn't pay for egg freezing. It pays for IVF if you qualify, right? And it's a big if, okay? And but it doesn't pay for egg freezing. So perhaps your employer You should speak to their, people team and find out if this could be, something that they use for employee retention.
I didn't even know that could be an option, but that would actually be fantastic. Yeah.
Now there is the flip side where people say, it's the capitalist patriarchy that's saying, freeze your eggs, we're going to do it for free so you can work harder. There's two interpretations of everything. But I think if it's something you want and it's an employee benefit that you have, that gives you more freedom.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's something for companies to consider as well.
Yeah. And insurance companies. I mean, in Germany, we have the luxury, as I say, of having really good public insurance. When I found out my insurance was so good here, I was like, I'm never effing leaving Germany. My private insurance in the U.S. wasn't half as good as my public insurance here. But unfortunately, there's maybe not enough pressure for them to fund a complete egg freezing cycle. I've heard from friends, I have not validated this, there's some things that can be paid for, but it's not funded at 100%, even though we need society to grow here.
Yeah, for sure. Germany needs it.
Yeah.
And that's the question, though, funding. And what is the price range typically of these?
It depends on which clinic you go to.
Okay.
So I had a patient from the U.S. in the D.C. area who told me for medications it was $3,000, and for the cycle it's $10,000. Versus at Ovom, it's about 2,900 GBP. So Great British pounds.
And that covers everything?
No, It doesn't cover everything. It doesn't cover your diagnostics. It doesn't cover the medication. The medication will range based on the person and their diagnostics. And it doesn't cover the AI tools. We have to do the AI tools. That's our way, but we also have to pay for them. So it doesn't cover that. And if you do 2 rounds of IVF, there are discounts that we give because we realize this is a financial burden for people, especially when you're building your career. Maybe you're buying your first apartment, you're getting your first car. There are a lot of other competing things and you're on a single income, right? So what we've found is that people really like to shop around for medications so they can get cheaper medications, and we encourage people to do that. What we've found is that people really do want to talk to other women about it who've gone through the process so they have an idea, and we have had patients volunteer to do that because they talked to other women and they got comfortable with it. And I think the other thing that people can do is also do things in parallel with your friends. So we offer a discount to women who are friends. We call it the besties discount. Okay. You can do it together so you don't feel alone, because so many times, even as a physician, I have felt alone in my reproductive journey. Whether it be when I was breastfeeding, when I was pregnant, when I have felt alone. And so we really want to encourage women to talk about it, because I think a lot of people are afraid of egg freezing because they think, oh, it's an admission, I'm alone. It's an admission, I don't have a partner. And I don't think of it that way. I think it's a realization that you are in your full power and that you have the ability to control something when there's a lot of things in life we don't control, right? Again, it's not insurance, but it gives you a potential option. And I think that makes it easier. And then when you're evaluating your potential partners, then you are going to be, are you worth my frozen eggs? And if the answer is no, see ya.
Yeah. I think that's such a great point that you're bringing up, because that's kind of what it's been for me. Because I think my mom was like, yeah, you'll meet someone. I'm like, okay, but maybe I don't. Or maybe I do meet someone, but honestly, I've had the worst dating experiences the last couple of months. And I'm like, listen, if these are the options, I'd rather be alone. So I think it is for me really that aspect of it's having that added, okay, there's a potential in the future if it happens, and I don't need to stress myself out about it now. And I also think it alleviates that pressure for me to feel like I need to find somebody.
Right. And I think if I could talk to my 27-year-old self, I would say, you're still going to be really cool in your 40s.
I hope so.
You're still going to be really cool in your late 30s. And actually, that's a time when you can go through some development of oneself and what you like and what you don't like, and what you'll put up with and what you won't put up with, because that's what partnership's about, right? I mean, my parents I'm not going to say how old I am, but my parents have been together probably, they met when they were 12, had a little breakup in college, and then they got back together thanks to my uncle. Shout out to Uncle Eddie. Thank you. Who lived in
Eddie.
Germany.
Okay.
Who was also a mentor to me. I was like, I want to live in Germany when I was a little kid.
How these things work out.
But my parents have been together 44 years. So soon to be, 45 years. 45 years.
Wow.
And part of that is because they have mutual respect for one another and they can tolerate each other. And so you really want to take your time, because remember, my mom had stomach cancer and was not well for a long time at the end of medical school. And my dad really stepped up. I mean, my dad always has loved my mom, but he really, I think for me, showed me, you don't play around with who your partner is, because at your worst time, are they going to be there for you? Are they going to support you? Are they going to love you even when you don't look your best self? And that's who you need to find. So really take your time. Don't be pressured. There are ways to still have that family that you want. And that includes egg freezing. That includes also adoption. I come from, my mother is adopted. My partner, I shouldn't say partner because he hates it. My boyfriend is adopted. So, adoption's also an option. But people know if you sit down and plan and you say, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, you have the ability to have more control. And I think when you have more control of a situation, ultimately you're happier.
Definitely.
Yeah.
No, that's a really important point and a great note. And I guess to kind of bring this whole conversation to a close, it was
I was having so much fun. I have to go. Okay.
I'm having a ton of fun. I can keep this going. I've been told long podcasts. But I wanted to ask you now, with Ovom, I mean, thankfully you're doing the research work, and that's super cool, because it's not just solving the current problems in the industry, but you're creating research to be able to have future solutions as well.
Yeah.
So what is your vision for Ovom? What would you love to see happen with your company in the next couple of years?
We want to expand. So right now, our clinic is based in London. It was a test clinic situation. My third co-founder had already started this clinic in London, and so it's central London. And we're already starting to see that we're being able to take care of people who otherwise wouldn't get care. Our very first patient called 5 clinics before she got someone who would even see her and talk to her.
Wow.
Yeah. And so now we're opening a clinic in Portugal, hopefully at the end of this year.
Yeah, cool.
And this is exciting because this will be a hub for us. This will be a complete Ovom clinic. And this clinic will not only service the people of Portugal, but also EU-wide. Many people don't know there are a lot of restrictions in the EU about who can do what, where, and what country, including our current home country, Germany. And so we also think this will be great not only for EU residents, but also those from the United States, because the costs are so exorbitantly expensive in the United States that you can't afford egg freezing, or you can't afford IVF or donor egg or egg donation or surrogacy. And so in the Portugal, context, we can offer the majority of services that are offered in the US, not all, but the majority of services at an American standard for a much reduced cost.
Amazing.
And so you can, even with the flight and hotel, you can have the services that you need, still high quality, with the innovation of AI, with the ability to do a lot of what you need to do remotely, so that you don't have to come over for a whole 3 weeks or 2 weeks. You can actually come over just for the salient things that we need to do in the cycle.
Wow. Okay, that's really cool, and that's super exciting.
I'm excited. Hopefully we'll be on the continent sometime. Yes, hopefully somewhere in North or Central or Eastern Africa.
Yeah.
And then maybe also in the Middle East, because this is our mission, so that everyone who wants to become a parent anywhere can.
Amazing. I love that mission. And last question. How can people get in touch or find out more about Ovom?
Well, we have a website, www.ovumcare.com. And you can find me on that website. We're also on Insta at Ovumcare, on Facebook at Ovumcare, on TikTok, although I don't love that platform so much, at Ovumcare. And we also have a WhatsApp. So you can message, and usually one of our fertility nurses will respond to you. And, we really mean to make it accessible so that people can get the information they need. And we found that, we're not trying to sell you something. We're just trying to let you know the facts. Yeah. And then, you make a rational decision about how to go forward. And we offer financing.
Okay.
That's the most important thing. We offer financing. We just started partnering with a new financier. So we're hoping that this expands the accessibility for people.
Amazing. Most definitely. I think the financing is the biggest part, and the
Exactly.
education. So thank you so much for your mission and your work and this conversation. I learned so much.
Thanks for
So
having
I'm glad
me.
that you joined me for it. Appreciate
Thanks for having me.
This episode left me with a lot of food for thoughts for both myself on a personal level, but also on a professional level. And I hope it was the same for all of you. So thank you all again for tuning in for this episode. And I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to like, follow, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite streaming and social media channels. And with that being said, onwards and upwards, y'all, and I'll speak to you soon.